What's up, everybody? How's it going? So I recently posted a video titled the seven, I can never get this right, the 7 best things about working at Google. And that video, if you haven't seen it already, go check it out. I'll put the link in the description down below. But so in that video, I painted a very positive picture of working at Google. And it was accurate. Working at Google is awesome. It's amazing. It is often glamorized in the news, rightfully so. However, it is not always just sunshine and rainbows. So with that said, I figured that I would make a video that's sort of the counterpart to that, 7 best things about working at Google. And this time, I'm going to talk about the worst things about working at Google. Now, I want to say that this was genuinely difficult to come up with. Truthfully, I had a hard time coming up with things that were really negative about working at Google, but I did manage to come up with 5 this time. Just please be aware that these are not things that are that bad. So, you might say oh wow, these are really first world problems. And in some sense they are, this just really re-accentuates how awesome the company is overall. But with that said, let's jump into it. The 5 worst things about working at Google in no particular order. So number 1, the first worst thing about working at Google, this is a terrible one. Basically, it's when it's the morning, you're at a cafe, you're in line waiting for your omelet to be made, and then you're told that there's no provolone cheese, there's only American cheese. What? Okay, just joking. I swear I'm not that type of guy. Let's start over. So number 1. The first worst thing about working at Google. And this is what I like to call the golden handcuffs. The golden handcuffs. Now, I didn't coin the term. I'm not sure who invented this term, but it's something that you often hear about in the industry or at the company. And the idea is this. Working at Google is amazing. It's great. We've already established that if you work at Google, you tend to have an amazing lifestyle, really just a great life overall. And what that does is it makes it increasingly hard for you to leave and to say goodbye to that amazing life to go do something else that you might be more passionate about. Maybe you want to start your own business. Maybe you want to join a company whose mission you like more, but that might be a bit less well-known or just different. It becomes increasingly harder for you to just leave everything at Google behind, because why should you? You have it so well here, especially the higher up you get. If we take a look at software engineers, if you become a senior software engineer, a staff software engineer, an engineering manager, it's kind of why would you leave your borderline $500,000 a year salary, right, or total compensation with these amazing perks and lifestyle benefits that you have for something that might be super risky, super stressful, and, just be a huge step down in quality of life? That's a sort of scary proposition. It's a scary thought for me, because I'm someone like that who's very who has a lot of goals and things that I want to do, and the thought of feeling complacent or paralyzed by these golden handcuffs is something that I really dislike. Now, I realize that not everybody will agree with this. I realize that for some people, this amazing lifestyle that you can have at Google is the dream. It is the goal. It's sort of the ultimate thing, right? And that's totally fair. If you're that kind of person, I totally understand, but here I'm just sort of sharing my thought and a common thought that I've seen amongst people of something that's sort of bad about working at Google. So the golden handcuffs. So now let's talk about point number 2, the second worst thing about working at Google. And that is the fact that a lot of the skills you're going to get at Google are non-transferable skills. What do I mean by that? Well, at Google, a lot, and again, here I'm speaking mostly for software engineers, but a lot of the stuff that you work on is internal only. You're using internal tools for internal processes to do things the Google way. And while that's great, and you can become a great Google engineer, you then quickly realize that if you're put into the real world, some of your skills might not be that applicable. As an example, I would wager that a lot of Google engineers, myself included, if they're taken out of their sort of day-to-day job and you tell them, hey, go spin up, I don't know, a web app that runs on AWS, they might not be able to do that, at least right off the bat. Of course, I have no doubt that they would be able to pick it up super fast. These are, brilliant people for the most part, but the point is, the skills aren't that transferable because you are learning a lot of stuff that is unique to Google. Again, I have to caveat this by saying that does not mean that you do not become a better engineer or whatever by working at Google. Yes, you do. There are certain skills that are sort of like common to all companies and all of engineering. But overall, there are a lot of skills that you gain at the company that are unique to Google. And that is something that can become increasingly bad for you the longer you stay there. Okay, so let's talk about point number 3, the third worst thing about working at Google in no particular order, and that is that sometimes the company moves very, very slowly at a sort of organizational level. Because at the end of the day, if you work at Google, you are working in a very, 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 very large company. And so naturally, things are going to be slower. And while you may not necessarily feel that in your sort of like day-to-day, when you're, let's say, coding, if you're a software engineer, or, in your day-to-day meetings with your coworkers and your individual, your direct manager, you might start to feel it at the sort of like larger level. Like, why are these big major system decisions or like these big major like technical refactor decisions, or I'm giving sort of arbitrary examples here, but why are they taking so long to be decided on? Why does no one seem to be able to come to a decision, right? These are the kinds of things that can sometimes happen in a company like Google. And again, here I'll admit this is not necessarily unique to Google. It's probably common to a lot of big companies in general, not necessarily just tech. But I feel like that does affect Google a little bit. And that can be like when you end up being on the sort of receiving end of that slowness, it can be kind of annoying, and you really start to say like, wow, I would love to be able to be like in a more nimble environment where I can kind of move fast and, do stuff. Move fast and break things. Let's move on to point number 4, the fourth worst thing about working at Google. And that is something that you've probably heard a lot. And again, might not be unique to Google, but more common to big companies. And it's this idea that you sort of sometimes feel like you are just a cog in the wheel, right? You are working on a tiny little piece of the puzzle that fits into a greater piece, that then fits into an even greater piece. And so at the end of the day, you're sort of like replaceable and worthless. And on the one hand, that's sort of true. Like, yes, at the end of the day, whatever you work on, especially if you work on a project that might not be like the sexiest project or the most, well-known thing, maybe you're working on like an internal tool or like an algorithm that improves something a tiny bit, or a little button on a UI, right? These might be sort of like seemingly trivial things at the macro scale. The only reason that I sort of actually disagree with this point, so here I'm playing devil's advocate and kind of disagreeing with my own point, is that you can make these sort of relative comparisons of, oh, this is meaningless when compared to this, when compared to that. You can make these sort of comparisons in many aspects of life. Like, oh, I make X dollars per month. That's amazing. But then I compare myself to this other person who makes $2x per month. And then I compare myself to this other person who makes 4x and then 10x per month. And then, someone who's like a billionaire, and you can sort of like trivialize your own accomplishments. Similarly here, yes, on the one hand, sure, if you're working on a small, like I was working on a user interface on Google Cloud Platform, at the end of the day, like that was a tiny piece of the entire Google Cloud Platform, which itself is a small piece of Google Cloud as a whole, which itself is a small piece of Google as a company, and then there's Alphabet. So yes, I'm a cog in the wheel. On the other hand, in my team, on my project, right, amongst my teammates, I was not a cog in the wheel, right? I was like, and I was part of I was like the wheel or one of the rims of the wheel, you know, I was like, I don't know. You get my metaphor. I'm improvising at this point, so I don't want to butcher this metaphor, but I think you understand what I mean. So on the one hand, yes, you can sometimes feel like you are a cog in the wheel, and that can be pretty negative, but overall, I would say that it's important to sort of like rationalize that and not let that, you know, take control of your mind too much. All right, so now we get to the fifth and final point, the fifth worst thing about working at Google in no particular order, and this is going to be the fact that a lot of times, it's actually surprisingly common, projects will get completely canceled in an instant at Google. And similarly, teams will get sort of disbanded or reorged pretty fast. Like it'll occur pretty fast. And when that affects you at the individual level, it can be very, very like discouraging because it's like, oh wait, the thing that you've been working on for so long is suddenly sort of scrapped and deemed almost worthless. Or hey, the team that you were on suddenly like no longer exists. Again, this might not be something that's unique to Google. I think a lot of big companies, especially big tech companies that have to experiment a lot and you know, make bets on things that might not work out, I'm sure that they all experience that, but that's something that I found to be pretty common at Google. A lot of people are affected by it, and it kind of sucks when it affects you. So that's it with this video. Those were the 5 worst things about working at Google that I've identified. Let me know what you think about them in the comments below. Did you find them surprising? And if you enjoyed this video, please give a gentle tap or gentle caress on the like button. I would really appreciate that. Of course, be sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell so you know when I post more videos, and I'll see you in the next one.